Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the virtual Cambridge Union. I'm really excited to be welcoming James Quincey, who is Chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company today. James first joined the company in 1996, and he's held a number of leadership roles around the world. He became CEO in 2017 and Chairman of the Board in 2019. Coca-Cola has just celebrated its 135th birthday as of May 8th, 2021. And today is actually a Coca-Cola holiday. So thank you, James, for making the time to visit us in person in Cambridge. We're currently adhering to social distancing guidelines in the chamber, which means that we do not really have a physical audience. Baltara, who'll be reading out our questions later this evening. But to all of you who are watching online, the form for submitting questions should be on our Facebook page, so do please visit and participate. We'll start the event with a moderated Q&A session, and we'll be bringing in some audience questions towards the end. So without further ado, please welcome James to his seat. It's quite a long walk. Are you comfortable? Okay, amazing. Well, James, let's just start with some introductory questions about you. So you've lived in London, New Hampshire, Birmingham, Liverpool, Greenwich Village, Latin America, the list goes on. How has this cosmopolitan upbringing and way of life influenced your way of thinking?
I think it really ended up feeding something that was already there, and that was, a curiosity to discover new things, to see new places, to live in new places, to engage with new cultures, because every part of the world I've ever visited or lived in, there's always something vibrant and interesting about wherever you go. So I think it was just really part of that whole journey for me of wanting to discover and experience new cultures and new places. Yeah.
And when you first went to work in the States, did you miss anything particularly about the UK, considering you were born here? And yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course, when I'm sure many of you online out there in the virtual world have left your hometowns or you left your home countries. And of course, the first reaction when you go somewhere new is to miss the things that are all familiar, whatever those are. And obviously, if you're British and you go to the US, you miss all sorts of strange foods and beer, and you have to try and explain to them that beer is lager in the UK and there are various forms of beer, and of course it's all hopeless because there's only one when you get there. And so you just miss all those home comforts. You have the benefit of experiencing all those new things, but you miss the things that you've grown up with, and of course that is why you get the homesickness and the expat food.
No, absolutely. Moving on a bit actually to your kind of early career. So you started in consulting at Bain & Company, and then we just have quite a few undergraduates here who want to pursue a career in consulting. So my first question would be, did you kind of always intend to stay in the consulting sphere and then you moved on to Coca-Cola, or did you have a kind of clear idea of what you wanted to do next, and that was a stepping stone?
Well, I think the most honest answer is I had no career plan. I'm not necessarily saying that because I'm advertising that as the best idea, but it is the most honest answer, which is I didn't really have a career plan. I was at university, I was doing electronic engineering, there was things in all sorts of other industries, and I just happened upon, the brochure. In the old days, nothing was online, just so to give you an idea of how it all worked. You encounter the brochure in the careers office, and oh, this looks interesting, and I engaged with the people, met a whole lot of people that I liked being with and interacting with, and just decided, well, I'll give it a go. And I never really had a vision of staying or not staying in consulting. I just felt it was something that was interesting, with interesting people. I thought I'll give it a go. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a great way of doing things, but it is what I did. And so for all of those people who've got a career plan, great, all power to you. And for those that haven't, it's not the end of the world. You can find your own path, and you don't have to have it all pre-planned to just start on the journey.
Thank you. That's actually really reassuring for a finalist like myself. Then do you have any advice for young people when they first kind of start out in a corporate job, if they do land something in consulting, for example?
Well, I think that the first thing that I say about looking for a job or deciding which one to take is do something you're actually interested in. The one thing I say to people is if you're interested, you're much more likely to get out of bed in the morning and do a great job. Because what most companies, corporates, actually most institutions are looking for is people who can do the job. Of course, when you're the employee, you want to learn things, but the company or the institution is looking for you to deliver. So I always say, look, do something that you're really interested in. Now, of course, you can find commentators who say, well, you shouldn't just follow your passions because it has consequences. Of course, there's going to be a choice in whatever you choose, and if you go into some industries, they're much more work intensive. Other industries are not. And so, thinking about the balance of work, life, family, free time, hobbies, money, you have to put all those in the mix and make sure you're happy with the combination that you've chosen. And if you're happy, you're much more likely to do a good job. And that's ultimately, whether you have a career plan or don't have a career plan, doing a great job is what gets you the entry ticket to the next thing.
Yeah, that's great. And I was going to ask, actually, how do you find the thing that really interests you?
Well, I think that's probably a very personal journey, because I don't know if you decided what you want to do yet. And let's I think face reality. There's some luck involved and chance. Again, all power to those people who really know what they want to do, and they've set themselves out knowing that, and they can see it into the future. I'm not sure I could have stuck to any journey that I planned. I was too interested in different things. And so there's always going to be some degree of luck or chance. There's always going to be some degree of discovering what it is you've decided to go and do, and deciding it's for you or not for you, or maybe that this was great, but I actually want to do something different next. And all of that's fine. I think sometimes people put too much pressure on themselves to think it's going to be perfect on day one, and it's very rarely perfect. And so some thinking about what is it that's important to me, what am I really interested in, and what do I want to learn about? Am I doing it with people I want to get on with? I mean, let's face reality also, is like work involves a lot of hours.
Yeah.
And so doing it with people you enjoy being with is another key feature.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually talking about things that are important to you. We're now going to talk about, well, Coca-Cola. In your recent kind of shareholder letters, you reiterate that Coca-Cola is a total beverage company with a purpose to refresh the world and make a difference. So just kind of have two questions from this. Firstly, what does it mean to be a total beverage company? And secondly, what does refreshment, kind of in the broadest sense, mean to you?
Sure. I mean, being a total beverage company, I guess, connects to our history. I mean, we started off as the Coca-Cola company, and we sold one product, actually in one package size, which was a version of that glass bottle there. And that's what we did for the first, 80 years or so. And essentially what we then started to realize is, it's great, we'd expanded all around the world, we had a huge business, but consumers and people, as they had more money, whether it was New York or London or Shanghai or Mumbai, as they got more money, as their lives urbanized and got more hectic, they actually continued to want to drink more commercial beverages, but they wanted greater diversity for all sorts of different reasons. And so a total beverage company is very simply the idea of obeying what the consumer wants, putting the consumer at the center of the business strategy and saying, yes, people want to be able to have the convenience and the enjoyment of drinks, but they want diversity. Therefore, if we want to serve them, we need to be a total beverage company, and we need to be able to offer them the things that work for them. And people are different; they have different choices. And there's a kind of a simple analogy we use, which is most people drink about 8-ounce drinks a day. Sometimes you drink them all in one go, but it's not a hard and fast number. But very rarely are those 8 drinks the same. So if you want to aspire to serve the consumer, you need a diversity, you need a portfolio. And that's the very simple idea of a total beverage company. And then the idea of refreshment in a way links back to the origins of Coke the brand and has been used as Coke the company. And it was always used through the history for the very physical idea of refreshment. I mean, it's a liquid, it's predominantly water, it's got taste, it's got bubbles, and especially when served cold, it's refreshing.
Yeah.
But it's also the idea that a brand can stand for something and can be refreshing kind of in a mental or spiritual way, and can make people feel better and uplifted by engaging with the brand and engaging with the project. So the idea of refreshment is really that combination, if you like, of a body and spirit of refreshing both and being uplifting both physically and in a way mentally.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Then moving on to sort of the role of, what you were talking about in terms of diversity, in terms of drinks as well, but role of corporations and kind of social and political issues currently. Obviously, recently Coca-Cola took a particular stand with the Georgia voting laws. So just, we can broaden that out a bit. Can you just share your thoughts on when and how corporations should engage in social issues?
Yeah, and there are lots of different views on what corporations should and shouldn't engage on. I think there are really two big buckets. The corporation is a thing, but particularly for those corporations whose names are the same as the product. You got the Coke, the brand, and the product, and the Coca-Cola company. And so you cannot separate the two as you might for other companies that have lots of brands and some name that no one knows about. So what the brand stands for in the case of Coca-Cola, the company logically has to stand for too. Otherwise, it's going to be very confusing for everyone if the brand tries to say one thing and the company tries to say another thing. So the worldview of the brand about optimism, about a better world, and it can be a better place, about inclusion. The brand stands for that. The company needs to back it up. And so companies, the Coke company, other companies, they take positions on things that are, very intrinsic to the brand that they represent because the company represents the brand. And then there's a second piece that becomes important, which is, we have a head office in the US, and even Milton Friedman, who's the arch, companies shouldn't pay attention to stakeholders; they should just worry about shareholders. Even he said, there's a big case for the argument that companies should get involved in policy where they have large concentrations of employees, because ultimately, I want the city that I'm in to be attractive for the employees, both the ones I employ today and the ones I want to have tomorrow. And if I'm in a city that's not attractive for some political or policy reason, then that makes my job as a business much harder. And so I think it's legitimate for corporations to stand for things and to advocate for policies that enhance their attractiveness as an employer in that city. I mean, and generally speaking, over time, the political system has the same interest as the company in that sense. Everyone wants more jobs.
No, thank you. And talking about kind of politics and now on to kind of sustainability and the environment, it's very clear from the shareholders' letter that sustainability is a big part of the Coca-Cola ethos, but there seems to be a particular emphasis on kind of water stewardship, integrating packaging into a circular economy and reducing carbon footprint. My first question to you is, how can Coca-Cola kind of balance these sustainability goals with your status as a total beverage company and wanting to kind of reach to as diverse an audience as possible?
I think it's a false choice to somehow say that sustainability is a goal separate to the business. And let me give you an analogy that may not completely work for everyone online here. You may or may not remember a company called British Leyland. British Leyland, in the 1970s, when I was growing up, because I grew up in Birmingham, was the third largest car and truck manufacturer in the world. Not in the UK, but in the world. And obviously, you can wind the story forward and know that they went bankrupt, and now all the car companies in the UK are basically foreign-owned. And British Leyland went bankrupt. And one of the reasons they went bankrupt is, in simple terms, they saw quality as something separate to the car. You know, they used to make the cars, quality was poor, so they would send it to the quality department, which would then remake the car, and then they would sell it to you, and you'd spend the weekend trying to keep the car working. And then along come, in this case, largely the Japanese, and so we've got this new idea, we'll make quality a feature of the product. So they'll make the car once, doesn't need to go to the quality department, so it saves money, so it's cheaper, and you can do something else at the weekend. Of course, you can imagine exactly what happens when you're the consumer, you buy the Japanese car. And I think sustainability is the same idea. For those companies that think it's separate, like British Leyland Quality, they're going to have a hard time competing and surviving into the future. My view is that sustainability is integral to the product, and therefore particularly those issues of sustainability that are inherent in the products we're selling. And it cannot be seen as something separate and different. It needs to be seen as a feature of the product, and that way, actually, it'll be easier to achieve our sustainability goals than thinking it's something separate.
And, well, my questions kind of tend to separate the sustainability goals, but I did list kind of water stewardship, packaging, and just reducing carbon footprint in general. Is there a certain sustainability goal that is of immediate priority to Coca-Cola at the moment, or is there one that you find is kind of potentially the most effective one, or are they all sort of a cohesive set?
Well, if you start from the premise that, you know, globally, the human race uses way too many resources. So if everyone were to have the same resource intensity in their lives as the richest people, or the US, for example, you know, so if the developing countries catch us up in terms of resource use, you need 3 planets worth of resources, which clearly is not going to happen. So if everyone, you know, wants to be fair to the developing world and let them have the same lifestyle that we have, then the resource intensity of what we do today has to go down. So if you take a beverage product and said, okay, what are the resources involved in the beverage product? You got water, you got packaging, and you got the energy, which is carbon, used to make it. I mean, those are the 3 fundamental pieces. And as we've looked at it and said, okay, how do we set ourselves up for the future if those 3 things are the most important things? Can we return to the environment all the water we use to make the product? Yes, actually, we set that goal for 2020 and we made it in 2015. So back to your question of which is the most important one, actually, the water sustainability one is a question of sustaining where we've got to and helping out in certain water-stressed areas around the world, but we already return the water. So that's one down. One kind of done and can be improved, but it's not the highest priority. The second and the third are actually very related. Packaging, and making sure there's no waste in packaging and creating a circular economy around packaging is actually part of solving the carbon footprint. And so reducing the carbon footprint is going to be a process that's going to take companies and countries through 2030 all the way to net zero in 2050. But the first big step we can make, or one of the big steps we can make, it's not the first one, one of the big steps we can make is creating a circular economy around packaging, because recovered and recycled packaging has a lower carbon footprint than one-way packaging that you just said, the landfill. So if we can do that, we can both solve the waste problem and reduce the carbon footprint. So that's the kind of the biggest one we're focused on making a big advance on now.
Thank you for laying everything out very clearly. My last question kind of on the Coca-Cola company is kind of about sugar and health. So as kind of consumers' attitudes towards sugar has shifted, how has that changed your thinking about the incorporation of sugar in Coca-Cola products?
Yeah, we've said very clearly that, you know, very much in line with the World Health Organization, that people shouldn't overconsume sugar, and they should seek to have the added sugar in their diets hit a certain level. And so what we see as a business is we want to achieve a couple of things. We want to have our business continue to grow, but if we want to obey the dynamic of helping people moderate their sugar intake and for some countries not get to higher levels of sugar intake, then we need to get our total sugar footprint to go down. So the way we think about it is we want the business to grow and we want the sugar footprint to go down. So that's a question of reformulating some drinks to have lower sugar levels, selling smaller sizes, selling drinks that have 0 sugar. So, for example, half of all the Cokes sold in the UK are zero sugar. And so you absolutely can get the sugar footprint to go down. We're not taking out all the, some of the products that have sugar in. People still want that, at times want that kick. It depends what occasion you're looking at. And so actually what we're seeing is that is starting to have effect. Over the last number of years, the total amount of sugar is going down, and yet the business is still growing. And that means that people can have the choice of the drinks that they want to enjoy in whatever time of the day when they want to enjoy it.
Yeah, and do you still think that there is a challenge in terms of conflicting demands between healthy and sugary drinks? I mean, you did say that it's going down, but kind of if you feel that people want sugar, should you be encouraging people to drink more sugar if you, or in the first place?
Well, there's a difference between making them, selling them, and encouraging people to drink more. Yeah. We're saying drink the right amount. And if you're over-consuming sugar, drink less. I mean, for virtually every brand we have a 0-calorie or reduced calorie option that tastes great. And so we're very much saying don't over-consume sugar. But again, it's not like the WHO is always saying don't have sugar. I mean, so it is part of your diet, ultimately. Yeah. I mean, in the end, it's the only thing that goes to the brain, is the glucose. So it is part of a diet, a balanced diet. It's just about not over-consuming it. And that's why we offer 0-calorie or reduced sugar calories on basically every brand that we sell. And we very much promote that and try and bring it in, which is, of course, why we've got to about 50% of the Cokes as 0-calorie.
Yeah. And the kind of final two sections of the moderated Q&A will be on, well, COVID, because we can't really forget that, unfortunately. I'm going to start with kind of the purpose letter again. This was written before COVID. So you said, as we head into the preparations for 2020 and beyond, I hope this has helped clarify the North Star that can guide us to further purposeful success. Obviously, now we've lived through 2020, and I just kind of want to ask you firstly, kind of how was that year for Coca-Cola?
I mean, Coca-Cola as the company, in a way, it symbolizes the effect it had on the employees. I mean, there was incredible degree of resilience and focus on the employees, and it went through a huge kind of roller coaster. Of course, the pandemic effectively started going global in February, March last year. What we would call the second quarter, so April through June, saw a massive global supply chain shock, and really it was about employee safety and keeping the supply chains running. And then, of course, it started to kind of improve slowly. The year, as it turned out, obviously we declined in revenues and we declined in profits. But what we set out to do is say, look, it's a crisis. There's things we need to do, and starts with employee safety and keeping the supply chain running. But the perspective of managing through the crisis, when there is a crisis, it's very easy to get sucked into the day-to-day management and the week-to-week management of all the strange things that are happening that don't normally happen. And what's very important as an organization is to do that, because you have to do it, but also to set a clear vision of how are we going to get out of there. How do we know we've succeeded or failed in managing way through the crisis? And of course, being the Coca-Cola company, and we're, as you said, 138 years old, we've seen many crises over the lifetime of the company, whether they be pandemics, and there have been plenty of pandemics over the last 138 years, plenty of wars, and plenty of economic crises. And what we looked at is to say, you know, when we were successful, what happened? And when we weren't successful, what happened? And the very simple answer was, if we focus on setting the business up for the long term while managing the crisis, we can emerge from the crisis faster and stronger than the average of the economy. So if you take the global average of the economy and say, well, it's not yet back to where it was pre-COVID, as we came into this year, and as we got to kind of March this year, we were already back to our 2019 levels of business. So we're getting out of our part of the crisis faster than the global economy. Of course, there's still many places with real problems, India to say the least, And so there are parts of our enterprise that are very focused still on safety and supply chains and providing, funding and product and supplies to the communities to help out with the COVID relief. But as a global enterprise, we now see ourselves coming out of the crisis and starting to get back to growth.
That's great. And what have you learned about the company kind of following the pandemic and your ability to, well, persevere through this crisis?
I wouldn't say it was a completely new insight. I think it was a validation, what this crisis provided. It was a validation on the incredible resilience and commitment and creativity of the employees to manage through the crisis. All the crazy things that happened, all the terrible human tragedies that happened around the system, and of course with our own employees, ill and obviously some pass away, and yet the organization has been able to rally round, support those people, and yet still drive the business forward. So it's an incredible revalidation of the ingenuity and the commitment and the resilience of the employees who are the ones ultimately who are carrying this business forward. So I think it was a great revalidation.
Yeah, that's great. And am I correct in thinking that there's still new products that were being kind of produced and thought about during the pandemic? Because I saw recently that Coca-Cola is launching a sparkling water kind of brand called Aha, or is that happening now? And
yeah, yes, we did launch some brands. We launched Aha in the US right at the beginning of 2020, and it's still there. And we're looking at launching it in other countries. We've launched a hard seltzer around the world, including in GB. So we have continued the innovation pipeline, but it would be fair to say that during the crisis, much like many other manufacturers and actually much like many of the retailers, to keep the supply chains open, it's in everyone's interest to simplify, which means less of the small niche products, less of the new innovations, because otherwise it gets very difficult to keep the supermarkets full. And everyone can remember when there was kind of the panic buying and things. And in those sorts of period, less is more. You've got to focus on a few products. So there were less innovations in the crisis by us and by many others. But of course, as we start to come out of the crisis, we'll start to see more innovations come back, and we'll build on the few that we did do in 2020.
That's great. And just a few questions about, well, pretty much the Coca-Cola drink. Firstly, do you have a favorite Coca-Cola variety?
I think it would be fair to say the one I consume most is Diet Coke, mainly because I grew up with it in the UK. But I drink because I worked 10 years in Latin America, a lot of time in Mexico, I drink the Mexican Coke as well, which is a kind of special.
Is it slightly different?
It's slightly different. It comes in the kind of the glass bottle. It's easier to get in the glass bottle. There's more romance around it. So I just do it because I spent a lot of time living there.
Nice. And today you chose Coke Zero.
Yeah. I had one upstairs. I got another one here.
That's great. And well, I think everybody wants to know the answer to this question, but I'll give it a go anyway. Do you know the secret Coca-Cola recipe? Or does anybody know?
Oh, there are a few people who know. I can't say I've memorized it. I have read it and looked at it, but I haven't memorized it. But it is a very special formula. I mean, it's kept in a very high-tech safe.
Wow.
It's not stored in digital form. It's just on a piece of paper, typewritten. Actually got some handwritten notes on it. And there are, if you really like the kind of minutiae and anecdotes about the Coke Secret Formula recipe, there are way less copies of the Coke Secret Formula than, let's say, the Declaration of Independence for the Americans, or there are way less copies of the Coke Secret Formula than even copies of the Magna Carta.
Oh, wow.
So there are not many copies, and they're held in very secure compounds, and there are very few people who are allowed to open the door.
Oh, wow. Who, at what point would you sort of be able to venture into seeing the recipe?
You have to be approved by the board to be able to allow to see it. And there's only a handful of people.
Most of us, that's not going to happen anytime
soon.
But thank you for this. Tara, do we have some questions from, well, our virtual audience?
Yes, we do. So Barbara, what, in your view, are the practical issues and conflicts in moving from the CEO to the chair role, and how is that transition best managed?
Well, I mean, actually, I've got both roles now. So it's like I didn't go from CEO to chair. I went from CEO to being CEO and chair. They're two different roles. The CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, is the employee, who is delegated by the board to run the company. So the board represents the shareholders, is voted in by the shareholders, and they appoint a Chief Executive Officer, who's the senior most delegated employee, who then chooses and employs all the other employees and makes the decisions, and is the one who brings issues back to the board, the strategy, performance of the company, et cetera, et cetera. The chair of the board is the person elected by the board to organize them in a way, or to help organize and steer them going forward, and to interact with the CEO. And there are two ways of doing it ultimately. Having one person be the chair and one person being the CEO, which is the typical model in the UK. And then you've got to have a lot of interaction between the chair and the CEO, because the CEO is the one with all the information ultimately. He's the person running the company, needs to work with the chair on organizing the board agenda. Or in the US, it's more typical to have the chair and the CEO be the same person, because there's a lot of synergy between the two roles. And in those cases, the board has a lead independent director, which is who's the most senior person who's not an employee, and then that person helps make sure that what the chairman, who's still an employee, is ultimately still doing what's needed for the board, because they're all on the line to make sure the company's well run. So there are two ways of doing it. Many people spend many hours debating which is better. I don't think there's a perfect answer, but we have a very clear model that works for the Coke company.
Thank you. Our next question is from Georgia. She's asking, what are your thoughts on brands such as Pepsi or Vive Cola? Do you think they damage the integrity of Coca-Cola?
No, we have lots of competitors around the world in the cola category and in many other categories. And whilst if people were trying to pass themselves off as Coca-Cola, which people do try to do, they try to come up with labels and names that are, almost exactly the same as us, then of course we would protest and say that was against the rules or the law. But generally speaking, competitors don't do that. And actually, from a business point of view, although it seems counterintuitive, it's actually better for the industry and therefore better for the market leader if you have competitors who are innovative and who invest in the category. Because if you are the only one in an industry, frankly, you tend to become lazy, and therefore, whilst you might have a lot of market share, the industry growth reduces. Whereas if you've got competitors who are good, they will push you to keep innovating and to keep investing and keep thinking of new things. And they will invest in the industry and make it interesting for the consumers too. So whereas you might not have quite as much share, the growth of the industry will be there for the long term. And actually, statistically, you're likely to have a bigger business ultimately if you're in a reasonably competitive industry with competitors who want to keep investing. So I can't say we always like them, but that actually it's good for us to have them there, pushing us to be better each day.
Actually, that relates to a question that's just come in that's asked about what your favorite innovation has been from Coca-Cola during your time.
I think my favorite recent innovation has been what we would call Topo Chico Hard Seltzer, which is a Mexican water brand that we have expanded into the hard seltzer category, which is a whole new interesting journey for us at the Coke company. It'll be fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. Another question from Zach is asking, will Coca-Cola ever expand its products outside of just beverages?
Yeah, people often ask me the question, will we go into other categories? And I think there are two parts to the answer. And the one is kind of philosophical from my point of view, which is I say, well, I'm not going to say never. Actually, there's a joke I use. There's a famous James Bond movie called Never Say Never Again. Do you know why it's called Never Say Never Again? No, because Sean Connery made the previous movie, and he said, I'm never going to make another James Bond movie until they turned up with a big enough check. And he said, okay, I'll make another one. And of course, as a joke, they called it Never Say Never Again. And so I don't rule things out as a matter of principle. Otherwise, you start putting artificial boundaries and constraints on people's thinking. But in terms of business strategy and likelihood, clearly, if you're a beverage company, the next easiest thing to do is another beverage. You know, we only have 25% of the global beverage industry share in you know, even in the most advanced markets. So there's tons of stuff to do in the beverage industry. Why would I want to go into an industry that I don't know anything about and has no synergy with the business I currently have? And so I always say to people, you've got to come up with an incredibly compelling case if you want me to think about something that's not a beverage, because I just don't see how it's going to be more interesting than the next beverage product or next beverage project.
Another question's come in asking if there's a such thing as a CEO mindset, and if so, what is it?
I'm not sure I could speak on behalf of all the other CEOs, and so I don't know there's a CEO mindset. I'm sure there are lots of things that CEOs have in common, in the same way there are lots of things that, you know, people who lead businesses, whether they're called CEOs or not, or lead institutions. And I mean, you do see some things that are very common, being able to set out a vision. Where are we going? I mean, ultimately, the CEO is in the position of leading the enterprise, which requires, where are we going? What's the vision? Where are we going? I mean, if people don't know where they're going to go in all sorts of different directions. So being able to be clear about what the vision is. Of course, it's a team effort to create a vision often, or sometimes CEOs, particularly founders and entrepreneurs, they go, this is the way, this is my idea, this is what I want to do. But you've got to be able to lay out the vision of where we're going. You've got to be able to choose the senior team and set the organizational, the broad parameters of the organizational structure and the culture. That comes from the top two. And then you've got to be able to follow up and make sure the execution is happening. I mean, so there are some, you know, obvious buckets for CEOs, but I'm not sure there's a single mindset, because they're all individuals.
Another question related to that that's just come in is asking about what the challenges have been to strategic vision and to optimism for Coca-Cola.
To optimism. I think the simplest part of the answer is, you know, we refreshed the purpose at the end of 2019, and we were coming off, you know, 2-3 years of good growth and momentum, and everything looked like it was going fantastically, and then all of a sudden, you know, COVID appears. So the challenge in CEO in a way is having the vision and the clear strategy, and then as things occur, even as profound as COVID and the shock of COVID, to ask yourself the question, is this temporary, or does this require a change of strategy? And as massive as COVID is, it's ultimately temporary in the sense that it doesn't change the strategy of where we want to go. And so that becomes a very important decision to make, because if it's a change of strategy, you need to organize to do a whole set of things differently. If it's temporary, you have to manage through the crisis and get back on the journey that you were on. And for us, the source of optimism has been this look back at our history and being able to see that through literally every crisis that has hit the world in the last 138 years, the company was stronger after the crisis than it was before the crisis. And so, you know, rallying the people to say, okay, how are we going to come out of this crisis stronger than we went in? It's not just about surviving. It's about being stronger when we come out. And that then is the source of optimism of we can get back to growth and have a prosperous future.
You mentioned changes in strategy. A question's come in that's asked, have there been a moment where you've had to completely change strategy?
I mean, over the years, the company's moved from being one product in one package to being one product in multiple packages, which was a big strategy change. I mean, it seems obvious now, but for the first 60 years of the cola industry and the cola head-to-head, it was one product, one brand, and one pack size. And when a competitor came out with a different pack size, it was like, wow. I mean, you know, you know, it's all gnashing of teeth and pulling a hair. But the strategy change has been really to get clear that we're going to offer the consumer a diverse portfolio. That has been the big strategy evolution. And in the recent years, we had to decide, we're a franchise business, so we own the brands, we do the innovation and the marketing, but there are a set of independent companies, often we own equity in them, who are what we call the bottlers. So they physically make and distribute and sell the brands and the products to the customers. And if you go back 10 years, we owned about 40% of them globally, and we had to decide, well, we're caught halfway across the road. Are we going all the way across the road, or are we going back? Because we can't stay in the middle of the road. And we decided, notwithstanding that we got 40% of the way across the road, that we actually wanted to go back and not own the bottlers. That we were very clear that actually we couldn't be good at everything. We couldn't be good at branding and marketing and innovation and the digital engagement with people and manufacturing and distribution and selling and the supply chain. It would become an organization that would be too big to manage. And so we made a very conscious decision to change that piece of the strategy, focus on what we felt we did best, and have these entities focus on what they do best.
Somewhat related to that point, a question's just come in asking what drives the differences in types of Coca-Cola across countries?
What drives the differences in the Cokes across countries? The essence of Coke is the same everywhere. And obviously we have a water purification system that equalizes the water essentially around the world. One difference does at least perceptually come in. One can argue whether it makes a technical difference or not, but people certainly perceive differences, which is what is it sweetened with? In the UK, the Cokes are sweetened with beet sugar. In Mexico, the example I mentioned a minute ago, it's sweetened with cane sugar. They're both sugars from vegetables, but there you could have a lot of folklore about whether there's a taste difference between the two. But fundamentally, the biggest difference you'll notice is which container you drink it out, because the physical characteristic of whether it's a glass or a can or a PET bottle actually changes your taste perception as well. So, but this is all folklore. I mean, in intrinsic terms, it's the same thing. It's the same Coke.
I'm sure that'll disappoint some of the people listening who are trying to figure out.
No, people won't agree with me, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I say. We offer them the Cokes that we offer them.
Another question that's just come in is asking, what's the most important lesson you've learned as a businessman?
What's the most important one?
Lesson.
About what?
The question just says, what's the most important lesson you've learned as a businessman?
What's the most important lesson? I don't know. Is there any context for what's the most important lesson? Just what's the most important lesson? Be yourself.
It's a good one. Coming on to that, another question's come in that's asking for any advice about figuring out one's passions as a student.
Obviously, that's a question that I get with relative frequency, and I think it's very hard. If you don't know, I think ultimately it's a journey of self-awareness, of finding out, what you like, and there'll be things that you like doing as a passion that you don't want to do as a job, or frankly don't pay enough money as a job, and therefore you go, well, okay, I'm going to do that as a hobby because I need a certain level of income, or I want to live in a certain city or whatever, and therefore I need to do something else, and hopefully it can be number two passion rather than number one. But it is a journey of self-awareness, and I just would say you can't beat yourself up for not knowing the answer at 21. I mean, I don't think one can be expected to kind of know the next 40 years at 21. And again, as I said at the beginning, I absolutely did not know the answer. I did not go into consulting because I had a passion for consulting and I knew that was the thing that I was doing. It was not nearly as sophisticated as that. It was, here's a job, sounds interesting, I met a whole load of nice people, the pay looks good, and I'm going to go to London. That's as complicated as it was. It worked out well, but if it hadn't, and many people start off on journeys And then 2-3 years later, they go off and do something else. I mean, my wife started in accountancy, then she went into advertising, then she went into something else. I mean, there's no, you know, it's not a life commitment, the first thing you do.
The last question that we'll take is a question that's come in asking about how you think businesses can navigate questions such as sort of the sugar conundrum, such as needing to advertise things that may or may not be healthy for the sake of the brand. Is there a conflict there, and how would you navigate that?
Well, I think in general terms, you've got to work out what you're in favor of. You know, particularly when you're in a large international business that's well known, people will have opinions about what you want, about what you should do on all fronts, on everything to do with the product, on everything to do with the way the company's run, and you know, many of them conflict. And so, what's important to do is to understand what are you in favor of. Because if you have a position that you're in favor of, at least people can engage with you on what, you know, what you're standing for, and respect or disagree with, however you want to put it, your position. You have to be, I think, in favor of something. You can't just ignore the problems that exist. So, you know, in the case of sugar, we're very clear what we're in favor of. We're in favor of people moderating their intake of sugar. We're against forcing them to just do one thing, and no one's saying it from a regulatory point of view. So that you just have to be in favor of something and offer up a position that says, yes, I recognize that there's this societal problem that's an externality or whatever. This is this societal problem. It may require many people to solve it, but we, the company, are part of that solution, and we're clear on what we're doing to support that by implementing the solution. And so that's all you can do, whatever the issue is. You have to work out, you know, are you part of the problem? And if you are, what are you in favor of and what are you doing, even if other people need to do stuff too?
Sorry, I know I said that was last question. Actually, one more question's just come in, also from Zach from Trinity Hall. And he's asking, in terms of marketing, what has been your favorite Coca-Cola advertisement so far?
My personal favorite is an ad called Para Todos, which is a Spanish language ad. Actually, the original is an Argentine ad. It's been used in many countries in many forms since then. And it was an ad that we put on TV right in the heart of the Argentine crisis in 2001, 2002, which probably none of you remember. It was a total meltdown of the Argentine economy. They devalued, the currency lost 75% of its value, they went bankrupt, they had like 5 governments in 2 weeks. It was a complete disaster. The whole economy was frozen. Lots of multinational companies were kind of pulling out of Argentina, and we basically came, and everyone stopped advertising because, of course, there was no money. And so that was the ad that we went back on air with to say, look, we've been in Argentina a long time, we're still here, and we're always going to be here, and we make products that are for everyone. It's a very famous ad in Argentina, and it was really marking the moment of, like, we're staying, we're going to keep investing, we're going to keep creating jobs, even though the crisis was apocalyptic.
Thank you, Tara, for all of those audience questions. I'm actually just on the back of kind of marketing, and you mentioned earlier the brand of Coca-Cola. What is it about the Coca-Cola brand that you think is just carrying on its kind of success and its kind of widespread recognition globally?
Well, that's like pulling a piece of string. It's an interesting question. I mean, there are things about the product itself that are very engaging for people. Obviously, the nature of its taste, the nature of its the product itself, the flavors, the fizziness, the coldness, or whatever. So there's elements of the physical product that are very engaging for people. There's elements of the marketing. Obviously, it's a very global positioning about optimism and happiness and being an uplifting brand in a spiritual, not just a physical sense. But there are also elements of the business system. It's a product that's very stable. It's a product, one of the founding ideas was everyone who touches the product needs to make money. There was no attempt right from the very beginning to try and make sure the Coca-Cola company made all the money to do with the business. It was very intentionally set up so whether you're in, you know, the richest country in the world or one of the poorest countries in the world, everyone along the chain is making some money. The Coke company, the bottler, the distributor, the customer. And so that's why it gets everywhere, because it's actually a brand and a business that generates income all the way through the value chain, all the way through to the smallest retailers in the most far-flung parts of the world.
Well, actually, it was just a question again on the marketing front. I read recently that the cans have slightly changed, the design of the packaging slightly changed. When do you decide to kind of have a mini rebrand, and to what extent do you find that it's good to kind of retain the previous kind of packaging that you had, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the great marketing questions, which is how much do you keep and how much do you refresh of the brand iconography? Certainly our approach with Coca-Cola is that one of the inherent pieces of the attraction of Coca-Cola for people is the authenticity and the trajectory into the past of, you know, the way Coca-Cola is written has been the same since the very, very, very beginning, and it's unchanged and it's never going to change. And so whilst, you know, there's a lot of human motivations to look for new things and engage with new things, we all also look for the kind of reassurance of things that we know. And so, you know, there are parts of the Coke iconography that we don't change and never going to change. The way Coke's written, the fact that it's red. There are some fundamental elements that always sustain. But around that, we of course, we look at how to present it in kind of the most up-to-date fashion. And that's not something that's programmable. It's something that's decided as you go along. Sometimes you don't do anything for 10 years, and sometimes you do something 3 years later. And so that's a real judgment call.
Sorry, I'm just going to check this. What's the time now? Is it time? Yeah. Well, actually, just one more question. I know you were at Oxford, actually, a few years ago. Just how does this compare? Obviously, it's a very different time, and there's actually not very many people at all in this chamber.
Well, there were a few more people in the Oxford chamber.
Yeah, I did look at the video, and I did think, oh, they have a very full chamber there.
Yeah, no, it was good. Actually, people are very much like like this time. People are interested in questions that go all the way across from, you know, the business to the marketing to how to get into business. The very similar genre of questions, or different genres of questions that have come up this time, were true at that one too. Not that you're competitive at all.
No, that wasn't actually the sort of, but I thought I might end on that. Well, thank you so much, James, for making the time to come to visit us today and for giving us, well, a really great insight into Coca-Cola and also your early life as well. Just in terms of the logistics for next week, and obviously with hopefully loosening government restrictions, we're hoping to open the chamber to our members in a physical capacity. There'll be more details about this on our Facebook page as well as our mailing list. Tara, do you have anything that you would like to add in terms of? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your questions and your participation, and thank you especially to James for coming today. Thank you.
Nice to be here.